stresses that you impose on the body that result in certain adaptations along a continuum from endurance to strength.
Okay.
And broadly speaking, you can categorize any kind of physical exercise somewhere on that spectrum. Of course, cardio and strength training fall on basically polar opposite ends of that spectrum. Even if you're doing high intensity interval training, like sprinting, many people have the idea that it's, very close to strength training. It's absolutely not. If you want to train like a sprinter, then you should train like an actual sprinter, which means you're sprinting for like 10 seconds and then you're resting for 5 minutes. Most people think of tabata protocols, like 20-second sprinting and then 10-second rest, as training like a sprinter. But Olympic sprinters, short distance sprinters, because the long distance sprinters don't really have the physiques that most people aspire to, is a very different ballpark. So you can actually see this in individuals. If they do endurance training, you stimulate more AMPK signaling, and it's more metabolic. There's more substrate depletion. So the adaptations that occur are things like mitochondrial protein synthesis, sarcoplasmic protein synthesis, increases in lung capacity, heart capacity. And if you do strength training, the focus is a lot more on muscle hypertrophy. The muscle gets bigger. There's an increase in strength. There are adaptations in the nervous system that increase the amount of force the body or the muscles can produce, even relative to their size. So these adaptations, when you try to put both of the body, you have both of these stresses on the body at the same time, the body essentially has to prioritize. It cannot do both at the same time. So a very crude analogy is that you can think of it as a garden hose. And with endurance training, you're basically telling it, you need to be more conservative with energy. You need a very long, sustained, slow output of water. And with strength training, you're saying, okay, we need to output as much water as we possibly can. So we need a big hose. And, in the body, it's a lot more subtle, of course. There seems to be interference between mTOR and AMPK signaling, for example, which are anabolic pathways that result in different types of protein synthesis. So essentially, if you're doing both at the same time, especially in close proximity to one another, then the body has to choose which kind of adaptations it wants, and that results in a compromise on both accounts, typically. So you won't gain as much muscle, you won't gain as much strength. Sometimes you also won't gain as much endurance, although usually if you do both at the same time, the focus shifts towards endurance, because if you think about it, if you do a strength training workout and then a cardio session afterwards, then essentially it's like one very long endurance session, because there's a lot of substrate depletion and fatigue from the strength training. And then with the cardio session, that adds on top of that. You also don't have to worry about things like walking to the gym or just going for a short hike, taking the bicycle somewhere. Those things aren't a problem because they don't result in significant endurance adaptations. So they also won't initiate all the signaling pathways that can negatively interact with the anabolic signaling pathways from strength training. Okay. So it's really for endurance training. Even mild cardio is not necessarily a problem, but on the other hand, it's also not really needed. Like there's nothing cardio does that you cannot also do with strength training, unless you're specifically interested in endurance training. Because of course, if you want to run a marathon, you need to run. You can't just go to the gym and squat.